Hello guys, I hope you are well and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to break down my next released Last Memories, which is out on Issues this Friday. So let's get stuck into Ableton and see how I made it.
Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop.
Okay, so here is the project. As you can see, if I just zoom out, it's nothing too complicated. There's not even that many channels on it. If you take away the sound effects and the textures, there's about 33, 34 channels on there. So there's really not a lot going on this one, but it definitely goes in hard. If you haven't heard it already, which I'm hopefully would have thought you would have by now, what I will do is I will play this little breakdown, and you can see how quite unique it is and different to a lot of tracks out there nowadays because of a breakdown. So I will just play it for you.
I got a bitch, she gon' kill for real. Talking about gliding, buddy. 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 Open the morning, can't remember nothing. Two bitches just flowing from London. Nothing I remember, they calling me daddy. The mattress was covered in money. I sleep with my jewelry and chains on. I can wake up and recount the money. I got a bitch, she gon' kill for real. Talking about gliding, buddy.
So there you go, you get the idea of it. I really wanted to lean in to the use of the sample vocal, which is a track called Last Memory by Takeoff. So in today's video, we're just going to go through each individual element. I'll break it down with the processes I've used and my reasoning behind them and how they sort of sit and work in the track. And then on Friday's video, we will break down the arrangement, because that main break is definitely got a lot I learned from it, and it took me hours and hours and hours to figure out how to get correctly to flow between a house beat and then sort of a hip hop garage sort of beat. So yeah, let's get stuck in and we'll start our way up the top and we will go through the bass line, because the bass line is definitely one of the standout points of a track. So starting off is just a kick. It is from a Deep Perfect pack, and as you can see, it is really short and really tight, which is perfect when you combine in stuff with the bass, because its bass is like a Reese bass. There's no sort of let off, it's constantly playing. So having this short kick, it's just sort of almost a transients coming through and letting the low end and the sub frequencies of the bass do the work. So processing on the kick, I imagine I haven't done much other than EQ, putting it in mono. Neutron free, I've been over this plugin before, but this is like a multi-band sort of dynamic EQ. So you can see I've just got the sculpt preset, set it to kick, and it's given a boost in the low and a dip in the mids. And if I just turn this off, you can really just hear how that's just cleaning everything up. So I would highly recommend looking into that. Another EQ, just taking away a bit more mid or mid highs really. Not doing too much that one, but I did make this track a while ago. And then a compressor, which doesn't seem to be working. I'm not too sure if that's the plugin or the way I've set it up. I know sometimes I have a bit of problems with these R plugins, they need restarting. I don't know if anyone else gets the same problem. Yeah, so that is just the kick, is really nothing complex to it. And then when you combine it to the bass, which is probably the standout part in this track in my opinion, So unfortunately I can't show you how I've made this bass because I used it on one of my hardware, which was the Behringer Model D. But to show you what the Behringer Model D is, it is an emulation of where are you? Of the Mini Moog. So UAD do one, and Arturia do an emulation of this Mini Moog. So if I just silence, so it was, in short, I won't try and recreate it perfectly, but I believe the first oscillator was on low or 32. I slightly detuned. And then I gave it some attack. I don't think I had a third oscillator. Had some glide, which is already on it. Maybe it was this one down here. So it's not identical by any means, but you can sort of see how you can get that sort of tone from this Mini Moog or the Arturia emulation, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's part of the V collection. So if you own that, you have it. So yeah, super simple. It just takes a bit of time fiddling with sort of the parameters and the ADSR to just get it perfectly sitting right. But it ended up working really well, and I've used this kind of bass on nearly 3 or 4 tracks now, and they always go off. So yeah, so nothing crazy. And then I've just got a utility with bass mono, so I basically put anything below 95 hertz in mono, and I've just added a little bit of width to anything above 95 hertz. I've then used R-Bass to just try and fatten it up, and I've decided to boost the higher end of the frequencies because that must have been a bit lacking. So I've decided to boost 250-ish. So yeah, it's probably not a bad shout. It's definitely got enough low end in that sort of sub-frequency, so I didn't need to boost down there. EQ, just taking a dip here, which I imagine, let's have a look, 175. I imagine that 175 is the fundamental of the kick. Yep. So now just dipping that bass line is just allowing that fundamental frequency of the kick to pop through perfectly. And then I've got a little bit of compression with the preset attack reduction. So again, I just sort of wanted to keep it that like respace feeling by removing some attack. Like I've mentioned before with compressors and stuff like that, if you're buying good compressors like these or the UAD ones, they come with amazing presets to start off with. So it can just speed up your workflow and help you as a producer. So don't be afraid to use presets or even invest in good plugins, because you'll hear a lot of people say that you don't need them. You technically don't need them, but it makes the experience more enjoyable. You often get a better result and it's just more fun. But it depends what you're doing. If you're doing it as a hobby, then, you know, maybe you don't need it. If you want to do it as a profession, then it's probably worth the investment. So that is the low end as a whole. There's really not a lot going on, and this emphasizes the point that I always bring up on either DMs or previous videos. Good sample choices will do all the work for you. So I've luckily chosen a good kick to start with, and then I've made this bass preset from a piece of hardware which is high quality. So when you combine the two together, you get a really nice sounding low end. On the bus, I probably haven't done much at all other than apply a bit of saturation, and that is that. So drum wise, nice clean drums on these ones, nothing too much going on. So if we just turn off the hats, and let's work our way through these. So starting with the clap, I've done 2 layers again, which I do in a lot of my tracks. Nothing much going on this one other than Stereo Savage. So this is a stereo width plugin, and it's just pushing it out in the stereo field, as you can see. And then what I would have done on the other one is I would put the other one in mono. So now I have a clap that's central and I have one that's wide, so it's just filling out that stereo field, and I'm getting more of a interesting sound by layering 2 different claps from just having one. And again, nothing fancy on the processing or the EQ, because I would have done some work on the bus. As you can see here, decapitator, I'm using the E module. If you didn't know which these letters means, they correspond to different types of sort of distortion units or saturation units. I personally really like this E one, and I know a lot of other producers do too. I'm just taking away some of the highs, as you can see with the high cut there, and bringing it dark, which is doing effectively the same as well, removing some highs, which is just helping it sit in the mix a bit better. And I've just brought a tiny bit of the highs back up with this Fresh Air plugin, which isn't actually doing too much, to be honest. So you can probably get rid of that. And then just an EQ again. It didn't seem to be any nasty frequencies, and I just decided to give it a bit of boost in the highs. So nothing special going on there. Now we have my 808 hats. 808 hats always make it into my tracks, even if it's just sort of the first hat that's just there for a bit of groove. I just love the clean and sharpness of them, and in a club as well, just if you have like a good kick, clap and like 808 hi-hat, it hits different. So we just have a standard 808 here, which is from the Ableton drum rack, so nothing special at all. And then imagine I put a decapitator on it, and I brought up the highs. The bright is now, that dial is now on the bright. If I just reopen it back up, so I'm just getting more of the highs out of it. And Stereo Savage, which is pushing it out in the field a bit more. I have this offbeat hat here, which is almost like an 808 and 606 combined. I've put quite a bit of reverb on it, and in the master you can really hear this one. It sounds really nice just with that reverb on it. Just has a nice space to it that a lot of the other hats don't have. And this is just an 808 groove, which I've made with one of my closed hat racks. So all I've done, if I go onto a channel, or the MIDI clip shall I say, you can see I've just used a bunch of different samples here to make my own loop effectively. This is just a really easy way and nice way of sort of creating your own top loops effectively. And you can just often get a tighter groove because you're programming it yourself, so it's going to better suit your track than using a top loop. So all together, that sounds like that. I would have put a sidechain and an EQ on this. I had an issue with my Ableton a while back. I think it's when I updated it. So if it says this, it just means that it just couldn't be found. But the pre-master did have it all on, so nothing to worry about there. Now we've got this hat loop here. hear that's adding some body to it. It's got a few different types of hat which sort of panning around a little bit, which I imagine I've put an auto pan on. And again, it's just helping fill out those drums. If I take it off again, still sounds good. You can just hear that's adding just another little layer of depth to it. So now if I just turn that off, you can hear now how that loop stands out quite a lot more. It doesn't seem to sit as well with the 808 hats that I previously made. And it's really doing a lot. So some people will work in key even with their drums. It's not something I do. The stuff I make isn't necessarily that melodic, so I don't need to perfectly fine tune everything to make sure it's in key with the scale I'm using. But it is worth paying attention and just using your ears and thinking, could I get this to sit better in the mix right? If so, then you can always use a plugin like this to help it just sort of sit better in the mix. Or if you wanted to, you could go on here and change the pitch via the transpose. Okay, so we got another loop as well. So on this one, we've got a bit of Saturn, EQ. That's turned off. Sidechain, and this P2SXX, or PS22X, should I say. It's another stereo whip plugin. This one's really good because you can pinpoint the frequencies that you want to boost. I don't know what I've done with that one, but let me just grab a new one and I will show you what I mean. So you can see here, I can go completely mono, completely wide all the way out, or if I wanted to, I could then just push out the top frequencies. So you can see where it says 2K there. So anything above 2K now is getting pushed out, and then anything below that is practically mono. So it's just a really nice feature and really nice tool to add some stereo whip to stuff, and you just have a lot more control over it compared to something like Stereo Savage. But it doesn't have the detune feature that Stereo Savage has, which sounds great when you're adding whips to stuff. So with it off, again, it's just helping fill out that drum group, add into the body of it. And if we look at the arrangement, it's one of the drum loops that comes in a bit later on to help bring up some energy. So that's all that one's doing. Nothing fancy at all. I think I keep on repeating myself when saying that, but sometimes the tracks that you think are like mind-blowing, I've had this personally, and then you watch a track breakdown of it and you go, oh, well, that's nothing special. And that's what a lot of tracks are. They're nothing crazy, their producers aren't doing mad techniques, it's just the groove and the idea is what carries a track. So if you have a good groove and you have a good idea and you manage to pull off it, then you know you're often onto a good track. So now we've got this 909 hat group. It's just this 909-ish sounding hat. This one I can remember it took me ages to find. So the track got signed and I knew I wasn't happy with the different hi-hat I had in. I must have been here for about an hour trying to find the right hi-hat. So I didn't want it to be too in your face. And again, like I was saying about like tuning your drums and stuff like that, everything I was finding previously, it wasn't sitting in the mix right. So you can always fine tune or just find new samples, like I said. Processing wise, EQ as per usual, decapitator, really pushing hard on that dark just to help it sit better in the mix. From a logical point of view as well, this was a good idea, because if we listen to all these 808 hats, they are all predominantly in the higher frequencies. If we listen to these hats, again, higher frequencies. These ones have a bit of body and mid-range to them, but again, they're nothing as much as compared to that in the mid-range. So by knocking down the tone into dark, and like I said, that's like removing some of the highs, that's what creates that dark feeling, and also cutting some of the highs away there, that increases the effect and the frequency space for those 808 hats and those loops. And then the sort of mid-range is carried by the body of this 909 hat. And that's how everything has its own space, by sort of cutting and boosting to allow certain sounds to have space in the mix and others to pop through in other parts of the frequency spectrum. It can be quite complicated to get your head around, and start analysing sounds from a frequency point of view instead of just, does it sound good? But it's just something that comes over with time. For me, it's only been really the past 6 to 8 months where I can start analysing a mix down and going, okay, well, that needs more highs there, that needs more mids. If I bring up those mids and then cut those highs, that's going to allow space for that. And yeah, you just get that over time. So I wouldn't stress too much about it if that's something you're struggling with at the minute. Percussion wise, quite a few different groups on the go here, and I think predominantly all of these came from my hardware again. So anything with Electribe, which is all of those. So we just put the group on there. So some really nice sort of subtle, glitchy sort of zaps and perks. So like I said, this came from one of my pieces of hardware, which is called Electribe. People like Render use it. I think Daniel Orpey used to use it. Latman does, I believe. Wheats is on one of these as well, I believe, from I've seen on his Instagram stories. So they're really good for creating these sort of like glitchy textural percussions. It's quite old, so it doesn't have a MIDI setup. So the way I use it is I record whatever I've made on the hardware into Ableton, and I just sort of jam out. I don't worry about it being in time with whatever I've made. As you can see, what I do then is I put it onto a MIDI channel and then use the slice feature. If I just go onto my push, and then I just have loads of little different cuts and percussion hits I can use then, and then put in place where I want them to. So that's how I use that bit of hardware. It's effectively resampling. If you've been watching my Track from Scratch series, you'll see how often I use resampling, even within loops and sample packs. So it's nothing new, it's nothing crazy. And because all the sounds sounded really good from the hardware, you can see I've done little to no processing other than using this SSL saturator unit just to boost some frequencies. But that's it. That's all I've done. And I've used some more saturation just to really bring them out. So non-hardware related, we have these zaps here. So let's just silence them, which is on offbeat. this one here, which is a resampled loop, I believe. And I've just like reversed it in certain places. Might have changed the pitch on some of them, just to create something a bit more varied. So yeah, nothing fancy at all. We had this Electribe one down here, which I didn't play because it only comes in every now and again. And we have this Zap down here. So I believe these are the ones, yeah, these are the ones I'm just changing the pitch on throughout as they're less frequent. So let's see what this one sounds like. So by changing the pitch, you're just going to get different sounds. So this can be a really cool technique to use for the sort of ear candy, or what I call them, or that's what I call it anyway, ear candy. So if I zoom out, you can see it's not necessarily in the groove, it's just sort of comes in every 8 bars, maybe a bit more frequent in other places. It's just something subtle to help keep the track interesting and varied and dynamic. And just by using one sound and changing the pitch of it, you can then create these sort of different ear candies, but just from one sound and all on one channel, so it doesn't get too messy and complicated. So that's pretty much the beat, to be honest. 27 channels in total. Just shows you don't really need a lot to make a banger. So let's just move on to the synths quickly, and then we will go over the vocals and any little sound effects I've used. So synths, there's not too many in here. We've got this one here, which is just a bass synth sample, and all I've done is just EQ and push it out in the stereo field. I think down here, oh, what have I done there? There we go. This one is just a sub boom bass. Sort of these FM knocks I use a lot in all my tracks. And they just come in every now and again. This one's sort of used as like a little 8-bar riser. And the elect synth, which you can see here, just comes in every now and again just as a new noise to keep the track rolling along. Again, nothing too complicated because I didn't want to take away from the bass line, the groove of the hats and the percussion, and most importantly the vocal. That is the standout point and the hook of the track, so I didn't want to subtract from that from having too many synths on the go. And then lastly on the synth bus, we have this one here, which is just a Curatero. I think I've butchered his name. Oh no, take that back. It's a Luke Van Dyke loop, which I've just chopped up. And then I've applied quite a big echo to it. And again, just some dead simple processing through EQ. I think I must have had a bit of a problem mixing this one down because there's 4 EQs on the channel. And then the echo and stuff like that is running through the send and returns, which we will go through as well today because as you can see there's a lot there, and as I've mentioned in other breakdowns, I use send and returns all the time. So let's just quickly go over the vocal. So luckily I didn't have to do much stretching or anything like that to get this vocal in time. It was pretty much in time from the get-go. And you can see, although it sounds like there's a lot going on with these little glitch vocals, all I've done is gone into part of the arrangement, Command E, Command C, dropped them down, and then just duplicate it. So then it's creating little stutters. So let's just try it on like something like this. Grab that one. And like you could even shorten them down further, or make one longer, space it out. So sometimes I will use plugins to make these glitch effects, like Effectrix and Tantra, and then sometimes if I want it to be more specific, I'll do it myself, like I've done here. And you can see how I've done that pretty much throughout the whole track, especially in the breakdown. So nothing special at all. Processing wise, the sample was good to start with. So like I've said before, if you're working with good samples, you shouldn't need to be doing too much. Stereo Savage EQs. I've done a bit on the bus. So I've got a few DS's on there. So DS's are effectively taking away the S's, and it will just help it sound better and sit in the mix nicer. And saturation, just to help glue the glitch vocal and the main vocal together. Probably wasn't necessary, but I like my tracks quite heavily saturated anyway. Textures, there's literally just 2 different types of vinyl, don't need to show any more than that. Effects, we have white noise riser, like a reverse cymbal, a big white noise riser, a more sort of like EDM riser, which is very quiet, but it makes quite a big difference. It just sort of helps fill out those rising sounds. Another white noise riser. And again, like a more dramatic sort of riser noise. And that's it. That is everything over the track. Samples here. So all this is a 606 kit. There we go. That's all it's doing. It's really nothing fancy. It's a standard 606 kit. And I've just made a hip hop beat. So at the time I didn't know how to do this. So I just Googled it and said, how do you make a standard hip hop beat? Watched a few videos. And that's it. It's really nothing more to it than that. It wasn't any crazy sampling skills. I tried to sample it from the original track and it sounded terrible. I tried loops, I tried loads of different stuff, but just doing it myself sounded the best. Okay, so I won't go any more over that sort of stuff because that is all to do with arrangement, which we will break down on Friday, on release day. But we will just quickly run through the send and returns and what they're doing. Okay, so send A is BV, which is just my standard, like, big verb, as I call it. So, nothing much. Only a few things are running through there at the minute. That's why you can hardly hear it. Delay. If I just put the gain up there, you can hear what that's doing. Effects rack, which is a crystallizer. I've been over this in my energy breakdown, if you haven't watched this. but this is just the default preset, and it's like a pitch echo modulation, and that's what can sort of create where it sort of sounds like it's falling apart. All of that kind of stuff, that's all coming from there. Saturn and Tantra, so let's see what we're using that on. So that's what's creating these sort of glitched out reverbed effects. I'm only using this in this breakdown to sort of create and make some more tension. Effects rack, which we have got an LFO attached to the time. So let's find out where we've put that on. So I believe we've got that one on here. Yep, so we've got this one on the drum bus. You can hear what that's doing. So using the time and the LFO, that's what's creating that sort of pitch modulation and creating almost like a tape delay. We've got another echo here, which is a long echo, I believe, which you can sort of hear right on the drop. That's my drum reverb there. That's a different reverb. The only difference in this one is I usually like to put the decay slightly up and then run my percussion through that one. And then this is a different reverb again. This would be for my vocal. Yep, that's my vocal reverb. And then I've got this H compressor, which if we go into session view, you can see that J has got all the buses running through it. This is just my parallel compression setup. Like I've said before, I like parallel compression because I can't fuck it up. If I start compressing the channels individually, it's very easy to overdo because, like I've said, some samples have already been compressed and saturated and processed. So just by doing this and running it all through one compressor, you just get like a nice effect. And if you're using a good compressor like this H compress one, you can almost get a bit of extra colour and analogness when using stuff like the H compressors or the UAD stuff. And that is it. On the master chain, all I've got is a Q-Tech EQ, which I've just done some boosts on. Multi-band compressor, just controlling that low end a little bit. Probably doesn't need that on the mix down, to be honest, that would be a mastering thing. Ozone 9, which is just, I'm using it as a reference with the EQ. So I had a reference loaded in. So you can see there, I picked another issues release to base the reference off of. Ozone then compares it and looks where your track is lacking. So I could have sort of had some mids and mids highs just boosted. It looks like it's boosting a lot, but remember that's like 4 dB there. So it's only boosting by 1 or 2 dB. And then I use a Oxford inflator on the master chain just to add again some more warmth and analog sort of feeling to my tracks. And then I've just got this L3 just to boost the volume to get it hitting at 0 dB for the sake of this video. But I would turn this off when sending the label pre-master. And there we go. That is a quick breakdown of my track Last Memories, which is out on Issues Friday the 19th of May. So I really appreciate any support, any pre-orders, any of you guys playing it, sending me the videos on Instagram. If you don't follow me already, go to the descriptions box and where it says all links, you can then follow me on Instagram, TikTok, SoundCloud, and obviously YouTube if you haven't already. And that is it. I hope you guys really enjoyed that one. we will be going over the arrangement breakdown of this track on Friday. So I will see you then.